Hello, I'm Louis Meyers, and welcome to Meet the Author, where we talk with authors about their books. And I am so pleased to welcome back to our show Miss Rae Meadows, who was here last year. She has other books that we want to talk about today and all sorts of questions for her. Miss Meadows is on Zoom with us from her home in Brooklyn, where she lives with her husband and children. She graduated undergraduate from Stanford and has a master's in fine arts from the University of Utah writing program. And Ms. Meadows, welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here and so nice to be back.
We talked last year about your book, Winterland, which was a remarkable book about a young girl in Soviet industrial city in Siberia who becomes a gymnast, looks at her progress through toward becoming an elite Olympic gymnast. It also looked at sort of the fading Soviet society of the 1970s and a look back at the horrors of the Stalin regime. It was a remarkable book. And now you have two other books. Both of these were written several years ago but can be found on the internet or in bookstores. I Will Send Rain and the book Mercy Train. And let's talk about the first one, I Will Send Rain. Why don't you describe briefly what the story is?
Well, the story is, I don't like to say it's about the Dust Bowl, but the Dust Bowl is the backdrop to the story about a family who is who lives in the panhandle of Oklahoma and in the 1930s, and when the Dust Bowl begins. And it kind of the Dust Bowl and the storms and kind of knocks this family loose, and each of the characters are spun out in their own different ways. One of the things that I really am interested in is in an extremely harsh environment, and it kind of goes back to the Winterland as well, how people go back to being human very quickly. They adapt and they just keep moving on. And so in Will Send Rain, the kind of human drama play out with the backdrop of this extreme system of drought and dust storms that are so unbelievable that they at first thought it was the apocalypse had begun.
Yeah, and I think obviously practically no one today lived through that. And you hear very little bit about it, but when you read your book, you realize what a remarkable, enormous challenge it was to live in those conditions. Indeed, in reading about that and Winterland, nature and the physical settings almost become like a character in your novels, a separate character in and of themselves. How did you come about to writing about nature and the surroundings in that way?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and that's how I think about it as well. One of the inspirations for writing I Will Send Rain, I was reading a lot. I read a couple biographies of the photographer Dorothea Lange, and I was very interested in her and her work. And then I came across photos of that period of the dust storm. I really had no idea what they were like. I mean, what I learned about them in grade school was just that it was a drought and but I didn't understand the magnitude of these huge black clouds that would descend on parts of the country. And so, yeah, to me, it just became, I was just fascinated. I was fascinated that people, we were familiar with Steinbeck and the people who left and to go to California, but there were so many people that stayed and just thought things would get better year after year after year. And I found that resilience fascinating, and also this kind of hope that things would get better, that surely things would get better. And this went on for 10 years. So some people lasted, families lasted in this subsistence environment for that long.
You use the word resilience, and that is another feature of that book and these two books, I think, Winterland and these two books, is characters who show remarkable resilience in the face of extremely difficult circumstances. In Winterland, it's an older woman looking back on how did she survive the Gulag in the 1930s. Of course, this family in the midst of the Depression and Dust Bowl in the 1930s. And then a remarkable web of stories, I think, in Mercy Train. And I found that to be one of the most remarkable novels I've ever read. Tell us a little bit about Mercy Train. What is the story there?
Mercy Train, I mean, a lot of my novels begin with kind of my obsession with certain historical time periods or incidents. And in Mercy Train, it was the kind of New York of the turn of the century, where there were opium dens and thousands of kids who were basically homeless, just running around and involved in crime or doing whatever they can to, to get by. I mean, we're kind of used to I think the story of the slums in that period. And I was just really interested in it. And so I wanted to, it's not, as you said, like people don't remember these times, and it really wasn't that long ago. So I wanted to make a kind of 3-generational story linked back to that turn of the century New York. And I just think in general, we take for granted that kind of everyday people can have remarkable backstories, and I think that that's something that drives my writing as well. And so in Mercy Train, you have these 3 generations of women, but it's not that far of a link to see back this time period that's such a colorful and rather extraordinary to me anyway. And certainly the idea of the orphan trains was extraordinary as well, where kids were just put on trains and sent to the Midwest without any oversight or anything to be adopted, and most of the time taken up as farm hands or free labor.
Yeah, and I was not aware of them. These trains were actually done through Christian organizations, and they were ostensibly, beneficent, intentions. Because the lives that these children and you sketch out their lives, are early death in many cases. They weren't going to survive very long in the New York City of that era, and it was just horrible conditions. And yet, the oversight once they dropped them off was somewhat limited. Your main character actually finds herself in a somewhat better situation out in the Midwest. Reminded me a little bit of Cider House Rules.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
In the sense that she ends up in a family where or a setting where there's an elderly doctor who's taking care of patients, and somewhat benign setting. But how were you able to paint such a vivid portrait of turn of the century New York City?
One of the things that I love doing in researching is going through photographs and looking at archives and kind of immersing myself in the visual of those periods. And there's so much that exists, historical records. Like there was one thing that I looked at which is kind of amazing. You can go back to the late 1800s, and there's a survey that was done block by block in downtown Manhattan of who had what disease, and those kind of records, you kind of get a feel for neighborhoods, and I just loved it. And I saw a couple of photographs of when I first moved to New York City in the 90s. I lived on Broome Street, and it was still in a more now everything is different, but it was more of a transition, and you could still see the kind of historical roots of the first Chinese settle. It bordered on Chinatown, so you kind of got a little of that, and the Bowery, and you still had a little bit of that grittiness left. And I just find it interesting. I find it fascinating how people live through things without, there isn't an option. So the option is you live and you survive, and in some cases, and I think with some of my characters, even in Orphan Train, there's kind of joy to be had and life to be lived despite the kind of incredibly negative circumstances.
Some very vivid portrayals of mothers and daughters too. You have, I believe, two daughters.
I do have two daughters, yes, who are now teenagers, which is kind of
Yeah.
crazy, but
Did you take any of this from your own feelings of being a mother?
I think so. I'm also one of three. I have two sisters, and then I have two daughters, and so my orientation is definitely one of being a sister. I was very close with my own mom, and I think that is a very rich dynamic to explore. One of the things about Mercy Train that I changed my opinion about along the way, um, is that even in the end, when Violet is given a better life by the outside standards. You know, she has kind of a safer, cleaner, calmer life that she's given when she moves to the Midwest. But that yearning of wanting to be with her mother never really leaves her. And I think that one of the things that I came to in writing that novel was that was a stronger bond for her, that kind of being with her mother, despite the kind of horrible living conditions and all that, was more important to her perhaps than getting the life that she was given.
Yeah. And there's another character in more modern day who is struggling with this sort of end-stage breast cancer. Was that an
Yeah.
experience from your own life or family life?
I mean, my mom did have breast cancer. It was less from that, but I think that all of us who have aging parents and parents who die, and everyone is going to, you know, most people are going to be in that situation, have to kind of grapple with some of those issues. And I like to explore things through characters. So I think that the relationship that she has with her daughter and what she ends up asking her daughter to do um, is something that I haven't experienced myself, but I wanted to kind of explore what that would feel like and what that kind of both burden and responsibility and uh, duty would feel like for a child or for a daughter to be asked to do.
Well, that leads me into a series of questions that I had, which are not specific to the book, but people may be interested because you are now such an established, successful novelist. Um, First of all, tell us a little bit about your life before you became a novelist.
Well, it's funny because in the world of writing, I was a late bloomer. I did not start writing in college. A lot of my friends were doing that, and I didn't really understand what that meant, and I didn't have the confidence to. And when I was an undergraduate, you had to sleep outside all night to get one of the few coveted spots in a fiction writing class, and I didn't do that, and I didn't get it. I don't know. It wasn't something that I had tapped into yet. So it wasn't until I um, I was in my 20s and I was living in San Francisco and I had a series of jobs in advertising and some things that I didn't really care about that much. And I really had a kind of like an aha moment in feeling just unsatisfied and not knowing what I was doing. And then I had this moment. I was a reader and I loved writing, and I thought, if I had any choice, what would I want to be? And that kind of struck me as that I wanted to be a writer. And so I took a class through Berkeley Extension, an adult, you know, writing class, and I met a teacher there who was just wonderful. And he held these workshops at his house with a group of people, and that's really what got me going. I think the validation from him that I had something to say and that I had some ability led me to then apply to get a master's and really shift my life that way. I went to the University of Utah, and it was 2 years where I could just kind of devote to writing, and I really loved it. And that kind of put me on the path of writing. So when I moved to New York after that, I was working at another job, but I was writing on the side, and that's kind of never left. I think that the feeling of having written something is the thing that really drives me. Sometimes writing is not always that fun or pleasant because it's just difficult, but having written and having something, I'm right now, I just finished the draft of a novel, and it's such a fun stage because I have the blueprint down and I can work on it, but it's not this kind of open-ended blank page stage, which would be kind of terrifying.
Well, it's a bit of a leap of faith to become
Yeah.
particularly a novelist, because I mean, if you're nonfiction, you can write for newspapers and magazines and this and that,
Yeah.
but a novelist is a very would seem to me a somewhat solitary undertaking,
Very much so, yeah.
and um, And it's a long process. We've talked to other authors. You know, it can take years to write a book, and you don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
At the beginning, how do you get this? And maybe you've touched on this already, but where do you get the starting idea for a novel? Does it come on like that, or does it percolate
It's
for a
really
while?
kind of, yeah, it's a bit of an obsession or something that sticks around in my head. And sometimes ideas are not novels. Sometimes I'll have an idea and then be like, oh, it doesn't really have the breadth to be a novel. But usually it's something that's been kicking around in my brain, and sometimes it's about putting things together. So with I Will Send Rain, it was putting together the Dust Bowl with I was interested in kind of the father in the book has this blind faith that leads him off into a little bit of I don't know what kind of territory you want, a little off, unhinged. And I was interested in that, and kind of putting all these pieces together sometimes then you can kind of find a story within that framework. But yes, it's usually a bit of an obsession. It's often comes with images that I'm interested in, or that I have in my head, or some story that I've heard, and just sits around. Um,
One of
yeah.
the remarkable things I've found about your books is while there are certain things that you've been involved with, such as I think the character in this is clay. She throws clay and makes beautiful objects, and
Yeah.
you had an interest
Yeah.
in gymnastics when you were younger, and yet
Yeah.
these were not prominent parts of your life. I find that many novelists write, people who ex-policemen write police novels,
Yeah.
and others write novels. Politicians write political novels, so things that they've been intimately involved with for years, and yet you go off to different fields where you really haven't been directly involved, which is a real leap of faith.
Yeah. It is a leap of faith. I do find it to be that's my favorite thing. So I'm working on the book that I'm working on now takes place in Kentucky, in Appalachia, which I have never lived there, but my ancestors are from there. And so I get these things where I like to immerse myself in a different world. And I think that's going back to kind of how a novel starts. For me, I have to be able to build a world in my head. And in the past few books, it has been historical. The one I'm working on now is present day. But even so, it's kind of creating a world that is not my own. And I think that it kind of sets up in my brain a fictional universe that then I can make the characters operate in.
Now, you mentioned you've used historical archives, you've used photographs, etc. Do you actually, like in your current book, your work on Kentucky, will you go and talk to people there? Will you get a sense of
I
how they speak
will.
and how they think?
Yeah, I will. And I've been there. I would like to go again. And for I Will Send Rain, I spent some time in the fictionalized. Well, so the town of Mulehead is kind of based on a town called Boise City, which is the westernmost town in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And I went there, and I actually met a man who was in his 90s who had lived through the Dust Bowl, and um, he had been I think a 10-year-old at the time. And it's fascinating. I mean, this is part of the Dust Bowl is so part of their psyche, even though it's a small town and it's a struggling small town. Um, that is part of their history and a part of their mythology. And it was amazing for me to see the landscape. I think that was the most uh, almost inspiring thing, to see what the landscape looks like now. And it's beautiful. It's really flat and it's really wide open, but you have the colors. And I think in the Dust Bowl, like where I'm used to seeing the black and white photos, and the kind of everything is gray and everything is dirty. And you see now what that land looks like and what it looked like before the Dust Bowl. So you can imagine what that people were just always hoping to get back there. Um, but it does. I believe that landscape really affects one's vision of the world, and the way that we process a lot of things, I think, comes from the landscape we grew up.
Do you, this is more mechanical, but do you have a special time of day you like to write? Or how do you structure your time?
I do. I generally write when the kids go to school. So I have like a period of time, maybe like 10 to 2 is my good writing time. If I'm at a stage like I am right now where I'm more kind of editing and rereading, I can kind of do that anytime. But the morning I'm definitely more effective than the evening. And I'm not someone who I don't outline, I don't have a plan really. I generally know an ending and then I kind of work within that. But I've seen how some writers are very methodical and plan everything out and outline, and that to me feels scary and undoable. I need to have it wide open because things change while you're writing. You figure out things that you didn't know before, and your characters kind of, they grow along the way. And so I don't think you can plan out really. I mean, maybe plot wise you can, but I think you can't really do it for the whole thing.
They're alive to you for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned editing. You're doing some of your own editing, but do you have outside editors, and how does that process work? Does it help you?
You know what? The process, I mean, my process is probably more solitary and is good for me. I mean, I tend to write the whole thing, work on it, and then show it to a couple people and see how they react to it before I'll show it to my agent. And then my agent generally will have some comments about it. But other people work differently. They show it to people along the way. They're in writing groups. They show it to their agent. I don't know if it's superstition. It's just I need to get it all out before I get anyone else's eyes. I mean, it feels kind of fragile sometimes. You have, like, right now I have this novel that I've written, and I like it, and I'm very attached to it. But as soon as you start showing it to other people, that you'll get comments and the crack to show, and that's good. You have to do it, but it is also, I would rather have the kind of almost fully formed thing before I get anyone else's comments, because everyone has different, and you have to kind of also learn to take the comments that you think are helpful, because not everyone has the same ideas or the same kind of idea that you do.
Do you work with the same publishing house for all of your books? I didn't actually notice that, but
I have the last I let me think. Not for all of them, but the last few books have been with Henry Holt, which has been great. But I'm also a free agent. Like the next book may go to them for a first look, but I don't have a contract with them. And the editors change a lot. So the editor that I had for Winterland is no longer there. So it's just as we know, publishing has changed so much in the last since I began writing. And AI is a whole other thing. But yeah, it's not the kind of old school where it used to be you would have your editor the whole time and you would do all your books there. It's just a much more fast moving, narrower, unfortunately. I think a lot of I'm not sure that, I mean, I'm lucky to have gotten into it when I did, but I just think we're in a different world. They don't publish the breadth of books that they used to because of
yeah,
money and
there's been a tremendous consolidation, and yeah, I think
yeah,
you're right that
yeah,
unfortunately we're seeing fewer titles come out each year.
yeah, totally. And also just fewer, not as willing to take chances on smaller books or quieter books in a way that they used to, which is really a shame.
It is indeed.
Um,
Is
yeah.
is there one character in your books who most resembles you?
It's a good question. I think there's a little bit of me in a lot of the characters. I'm trying to think if there's one that it's interesting because with the in both I Will Send Rain and in Mercy Train, I think there's a little of me in both mother and daughter. And I think that I'm definitely in all my books, even if the characters are not, like my first book, Call Out, which was about the escort service. That character is very much me in a lot of ways. Certainly not the escort part, but there's a lot of my younger self in that character. That's probably the closest aligned to me. This book that I'm working on now is about two sisters, and I think I'm both of them. but yeah, I'm in all of them in some way.
There is a theme in these books, I think, and that is loneliness and social isolation.
Oh,
seems
yeah.
to come through, and how people deal with those or fail to deal with those. Talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit. How did that become such a theme?
It's such a you're totally right. And I think that so many of my characters are, feel marginalized in some way, and that sometimes they're reaching out is not, there's no one to reach out to. Yeah, I think that there is definitely an isolation. I think I Will Send Rain in particular, it's almost, you can see it, because the character of Annie, the mom, is, she is kind of leaning towards another man who is showing her something, that she's feeling a connection with, that she's not feeling a connection with her own husband. Her own husband is kind of feeling a connection with this religious journey that he's on, but no one's coming together. Everyone's kind of like shooting off in their own direction. And I think for me that has been a real, it's something that I think about a lot. And I think even though these are historical novels, I think certainly in the world that we live in now, where it's tech driven, and there is less and less. I see it in my kids. My kids, they have their friends, but it's just different. Having tech. Um, I don't know. There are things going on, I think, with loneliness and isolation that will continue probably to get worse with us as tech becomes, just like as it already has, but our lives. But yeah, I think that is a driving force in a lot of my writing, and the kind of like uh, attempts to connect, and also the inability to connect. And sometimes there are moments of connection, and I think that the endings often of my books they're not exactly happy, but I think of them as kind of having a bit of a lift. And I think some of that lift comes from feeling some sort of connection.
Absolutely, and at the end of Mercy Train, a married couple sort of comes together in a more important way.
Yeah.
When I read these books and visualized them, I said, why aren't they one or more of them movies? Because not only are they
I would agree with you.
complex
I
stories
know
with great characters.
it's
Yeah.
such a funny process. I have been down the road with my first novel. It went through all sorts of iterations of moviedom, and then never. There's so many things that work with a movie that I've learned to just be like, to not worry about it. I'll say with Winterland, it also went down a path of interest for movies, and then um, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was just like a blanket put, even though it's not clearly not a pro-Russia book, but just anything about Russia then just kind of died. And then once something dies, it's very hard to revive. Though I will say I'm currently talking to a director, an independent director, about my first novel, which has kind of come back around. I think now that it's so old, it's become the 90s are back in again. So we're talking about that. I'm working on a screenplay for that. So I would love it. I would love to see it. I think of things kind of cinematically. So I would love to someday see something on the screen. That would
They
be
are
great.
indeed great stories. Of course, one of the things, if they were to become a movie, you do lose some control.
Totally.
Uh,
Yeah.
and it could come out in a different way than, I've heard many novelists say, that really wasn't what, I intended. So that's the
Totally.
downside of things.
It is true.
Um,
And for someone like me, who, the one of the reasons I like doing novels, I'm a controlling, I'm a control freak, so I can control everything about it.
yeah.
And then, well, yeah, when it leaves your hands, you kind of lose that, which is hard. Even in the publishing process, with Mercy Train, I had a very hard time with the publishing process for that book, because it didn't go. There were a lot of little things that decisions that were made that I didn't really. I don't know. They felt not great to me, and I think I'm a little bit more assertive now in both what I think about how a cover looks, or what I feel about an editorial suggestion. And I think that it's hard when someone is paying you for something and there's a whole team involved. It's hard say, no, this is not what I want. I think gotten better at it, but it's hard. It's hard
Cover,
to
and what does
sometimes.
what does this cover say to you?
Which one is it?
The Mercy Train with the little girl and boy.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I will tell you an interesting story. That Mercy Train came out in paperback. I mean, as in hardback with a different title, a title that I did not like and I did not want. It came out called Mothers and Daughters, which to me just felt so generic. And I didn't. I was really unhappy with it, and I didn't. I don't know. We couldn't, for some reason, we couldn't say no. I don't know why. And so then when the paperback came out, they allowed the change to Mercy Train, and I didn't know that that was even a thing. I'm not sure I've heard of that with other books, but I liked it better. I certainly liked it better than Mothers and Daughters. And for some reason, I don't know, the hardback became this marketing thing that was not what I would have chosen. But I like the paperback cover better. It's not my favorite. I love the cover of I Will Send Rain. That to me is I love it. It's a Dorothea Lange photograph. I gave them the photograph. Like all those photos from that period are public domain. They were taken by the under the Farm Security Administration, so they're government property. So I was really, really happy with that because I love the photo and I think it is very evocative of that time.
I agree. A couple final questions. What are three of your favorite novels? Not that you've written, but to read.
Oh yeah, yeah, other people. Okay. One favorite is To the Lighthouse, Virginia Woolf. I just reread it again for probably the fifth time, and it still holds up. I think it is extraordinary. It's not how I write, and I think it is just a remarkable work, and I find it totally inspiring. Another book that I love is a very small book. It's called Last Night at the Lobster by Stuart Onan, and it really is about the last night that a Red Lobster is open. And it's a really beautiful, intimate book about a lot of things. But it's one of those books that I've read where I think like, I wish I wrote that book just because it has a certain feel to me that I really loved and appreciated. And then I'll say one I've read recently that I really, it's a new book that I really like. It's by Lily King. It's called Heart the Lover. It's a big book. I mean, it's a lot of places. It hits to a certain, it's kind of starts as college, a college story. She's around my age, so I like it. It kind of feels familiar to me in some ways. And it's a smallish book, but it's about relationships and it's kind of a love story. And I just thought it was really beautifully done.
I think you've also mentioned in a prior interview that I read Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. And there indeed is a little bit of Faulkner in this, in the sense that you bring place, as we talked about at the beginning, place and characters together.
Yeah.
And of course, he had Yakima County and then all of his wonderful characters. But I think you've done some of the same. Final question. If you could meet or have dinner with any three novelists, who would they be?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Or
I will say
living or
Virginia. I'll
deceased.
put Virginia Woolf in there. I will put. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure Faulkner would be a great dinner guest, but I'll throw him.
He'd be drinking much of the time, I believe.
He'd be drinking. He might be
Sheets to the
turned away
wind.
from me. Right. And let me think of one more. Who would I put? Oh gosh. Oh, it's such a hard one because I also retain a very kind of Hemingway love, despite him being problematic in all sorts of ways, and his novels also sometimes being problematic. But I might throw him in there too, because why not? You know, if I'm going to do the heavy hitters, I might as well throw him in too. He also would be drinking a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say another heavy drinker there.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a delight to talk with you again. These are great books. Again, they're a little bit older. If you can't find them in the bookstore, they might be in the library, and if not there, they're certainly online. I would recommend any and all of your books, and we look forward to seeing the new book come out hopefully in the next year.
Awesome.
So keep writing, and it's just wonderful to see you again.
Thank you so much. I hope to see you again. Hope I'm
We will
back.
do that.
Would love
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.